Let's begin here, because too many people mistake intimacy for possession. They believe the power lies in clinging, in making sure the other person stays close. But true connection doesn't work that way. A woman who knows her essence does not beg for reassurance. She does not measure her worth by whether someone calls the next morning. Her presence, calm and centered, already speaks louder than desperate words. And that presence lingers in memory far longer than any demand. What draws a man back is not the chase, but the depth he felt when the mask of daily life fell away. Before I continue, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if reflections like this resonate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now consider this: what happens in the quiet moments after closeness. Many imagine it ends when the lights dim. But Jung would remind us that this is where the deeper story begins. Intimacy is not only a meeting of bodies, it is a meeting of the unconscious. Every glance, every silence, every breath carries hidden symbols. And what you choose to embody afterward determines whether the experience becomes a passing event or an imprint that cannot be forgotten. The common belief is that attachment is secured by effort, by proving your loyalty, by filling the space with constant messages, by demanding to be seen. But that effort often springs from fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of being invisible, fear of not being enough. And fear, once released into the air, does not invite closeness. It repels it. The other senses it even without words. Jung spoke often of the unconscious as a mirror. He said that what is unresolved in us is projected outward. After intimacy, this mirror is wide open. If you fill it with anxiety, you reflect back need. If you rest in self-respect, you reflect back wholeness. And wholeness is magnetic. It is what makes someone return, even when logic says they should move on. This is the foundation for what follows in our journey together. To understand that the real power is not in chasing another, but in returning to yourself, in honoring your body, your emotions, your soul, with quiet dignity. From that center, the story of love takes on an entirely different shape. And it is here, in this silent beginning, that the true arc of transformation begins. The moment after intimacy is delicate. The room is quiet. The air is softer, and yet the psyche is restless. What often rises in this space is not peace, but a subtle tension. Many do not realize how quickly longing can turn into fear. And it is here, in this first fracture, that the unconscious reveals itself. A woman may feel the silence as unbearable. Instead of resting in herself, she rushes toward contact. She begins to measure his absence by the minute, checking the phone, waiting for a message that will prove her value. What should have been a sacred pause becomes filled with anxiety. In those moments, she unknowingly trades her inner center for the illusion of control. Jung taught that what we do not face within ourselves returns to us in projection. The fear of abandonment, the fear of invisibility, the fear of being unworthy. These shadows often surface strongest after closeness. They whisper, if he does not respond, it means you are not enough. And too often, those whispers are mistaken for truth. The chase begins. It may take the form of constant checking, repeated messages, subtle hints, or restless thoughts that never quiet down. But beneath all of it lies one core wound: the inability to trust that one's own being is already complete. The unconscious tension becomes an energy that the other person feels. Even if nothing is spoken, the weight of need becomes visible in the atmosphere. Here lies the paradox. The more she reaches outward in desperation, the further he drifts. The more she demands reassurance, the less he feels free to give it. This is not because he wishes to punish or ignore, but because the unconscious always resists being trapped. Jung reminded us that the soul longs for authenticity, not chains. When intimacy is followed by grasping, the spirit of connection suffocates. Think of it as a mirror. After closeness, one partner becomes a clear reflection of calm or a cloudy reflection of fear. If fear dominates, the mirror shows lack. If calm prevails, the mirror shows wholeness. The tragedy is that many have never been taught to sit with that silence. They were taught instead that love must be proven secured or controlled. The first fracture reveals how easily love can turn into a negotiation of need. In these moments, the persona often takes the lead. The persona is the mask created to win approval, to appear pleasing, to avoid rejection. It sends messages not because the soul is speaking, but because the mask is panicking. And yet the unconscious of the other person detects the difference. A mask never feels the same as truth. What feels authentic draws them near. What feels false, even subtly false, causes distance. The cost of this fracture is heavy. Not only does it erode the bond, it also erodes the individual's own integrity. Every unanswered call becomes a wound. Every delayed reply becomes an imagined rejection. Life narrows into a single, anxious orbit around another person's attention. Instead of moving deeper into selfhood, one begins to dissolve into dependency. Jung called this the danger of losing one's individuality. When a woman abandons her own center, she hands away her inner authority. She lives at the mercy of another's response. And the more she does this, the less she hears her own voice. This is why the first fracture matters so much. It is not simply about whether he writes back. It is about whether she remembers who she is when silence arrives. Many confuse effort with love. They believe constant pursuit will secure connection. But love that is begged for cannot remain alive. It becomes obligation, or worse, resentment. Jung would say that such grasping reflects an unconscious projection of one's own unhealed shadow. Instead of holding the tension of not knowing, one collapses into fear. And fear, once projected, repels the very closeness it seeks. Notice how quickly the mind invents stories. He must not care. I must have done something wrong. I am not as important as I thought. These stories are not facts. They are the voice of the shadow echoing old wounds from long before this relationship began. The unconscious has opened its door and outrushes everything unresolved. The present moment becomes confused with the past. What was once a pure meeting of souls is now tangled with echoes of abandonment and unmet needs. The first fracture can be subtle. Sometimes it is a sinking feeling in the stomach, a sudden doubt, a restless night of waiting. Sometimes it is louder, filled with calls, demands, and accusations. But in every case, the essence is the same, the loss of inner anchoring. The gift of intimacy, which should lead to greater self-knowledge, instead collapses into self-forgetting. And yet the fracture is also a teacher. Jung believed that every conflict in a relationship reveals an opportunity for consciousness. The moment of anxiety is not meaningless. It is the mirror, showing exactly where growth is needed. When you feel yourself grasping, you are seeing your own shadow at work. When you feel desperate for reassurance, you are encountering the part of yourself that has not yet learned to be whole. Without this awareness, the cycle repeats endlessly. After every closeness comes fear. After every fear comes chasing. And after chasing comes distance. Many live entire lives trapped in this pattern, never realizing the root lies not in the other person, but in the forgotten self. Jung would remind us that the unconscious will continue to present the same lesson until it is faced with courage. This is why the first fracture must be acknowledged. It is not a failure of love. It is a moment of truth. It shows us how fragile our persona is, how quickly the mask slips when silence arrives. And it invites us to see the shadow beneath the fear of abandonment, the longing for control, the wound of unworthiness. These are not enemies to be destroyed. They are parts of the self asking to be integrated. Consider this image. A door stands open after intimacy. Behind it lies the unconscious, filled with memories, fears, and hopes. If you rush into that space with panic, the door slams shut. But if you stand still and breathe, the door remains open, offering a chance to see more deeply into yourself. The first fracture is the moment when that door appears. What you do with it defines the path forward. We must recognize that the urge to chase does not come from love, but from fear. Love is expansive, allowing space for two souls to breathe. Fear is constrictive, demanding proof at every turn. Jung spoke of individuation as the path of becoming whole. In this light, every moment after intimacy is a chance to step closer to or further away from individuation. To chase outward is to lose yourself. To turn inward is to preserve your wholeness. The shadow is patient. If ignored, it finds new ways to surface. If denied, it grows stronger. But when acknowledged, it becomes a source of strength. The first fracture is the shadow knocking on the door of consciousness. It asks, will you abandon yourself again? Or will you finally listen? Most run from this question, but those who pause gain the chance to transform. The reason so many men feel pushed away after intimacy is not because they dislike closeness, but because they feel the unconscious pressure of another person's unhealed shadow. They sense the invisible demand, the heavy need, and it unsettles them. This is why Jung emphasized that true intimacy requires each person to remain centered in themselves. Without that, the bond collapses under the weight of projections. So the first fracture is not merely a personal failing. It is a universal human moment experienced in countless relationships. It is the tension between fear and trust, between persona and authenticity, between shadow and individuation. When seen clearly, it is the beginning of wisdom. In the stillness, After closeness, ask yourself, am I reaching outward because I feel empty? Or am I resting inward because I know I am whole? That simple reflection can transform the entire course of a relationship. For when you refuse to abandon yourself in the face of silence, you protect both your dignity and the sacred space of the bond. And here is the paradox. The less you chase, the more likely he feels drawn back. Not because you manipulated him, but because your wholeness awakens something in him he cannot find elsewhere. But before that can happen, the first fracture must be faced. It must be named for what it is, a test of self-possession, a mirror of shadow, an invitation to individuation. This is where many falter, but also where the greatest growth begins. To see the fracture not as the end, but as the threshold. To recognize that the anxiety is not about him, but about the forgotten parts of yourself. And to choose in that fragile silence not to lose your center again. Because what begins as a crack in the silence can, with awareness, become the opening through which light enters. And that is the path Jung invites us to walk. When the first fracture opens, what surfaces is often not truth, but the mask. Jung called it the persona, the image we present to protect ourselves, to appear pleasing, to be accepted at any cost. After intimacy, when uncertainty rises, the persona moves quickly into action. It may smile when the heart trembles, send cheerful messages when fear is boiling inside, or pretend to be indifferent while secretly checking every sign of attention. Yet beneath that mask lives another figure, the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the collection of feelings, wounds, and instincts we have not yet owned. Abandonment fears, old humiliations, a hunger for validation never met in childhood. When the persona works too hard to hide these truths, the shadow grows restless. It seeps through in sudden anger, sharp accusations, or the quiet despair of waiting without end. This tension between mask and shadow is what quietly damages so many bonds. One moment, she presents as confident, even lighthearted. The next moment, she collapses into panic when the silence lingers too long. The other person feels the shift, even if they cannot explain it. They are not responding to the words spoken, but to the energy beneath. The mask is a thin veil, and the unconscious always senses what lies behind it. Consider how exhausting this cycle becomes. To hold up a persona requires constant effort. To silence the shadow requires even more. The result is a double life inside one soul. On the surface, a woman may seem steady. Underneath, she is flooded with fear that she dares not reveal. Jung warned that this split leads to neurosis, the suffering of a divided self. The mask tries to please, while the shadow cries to be seen. What happens in relationships is a projection of this inner conflict. The persona says, I will not demand too much. I will appear easy. I will keep the peace. The shadow whispers, I am terrified of being left. I need you to prove I matter. When these two voices speak, at once confusion follows. The partner feels both pull and pressure, attraction and resistance. This is why intimacy can shift so suddenly from closeness to distance, not because of what happened in the moment, but because of what surfaced afterward. The cost of living from persona is not only relational, It is deeply personal. Each time the mask is chosen over authenticity, the self weakens. Each time fear dictates action, the soul forgets its own strength. Jung emphasized that individuation, the journey toward becoming whole, cannot begin until one dares to look directly at the shadow. To live only from persona is to remain a stranger to oneself. And yet most are trained to polish the mask rather than integrate the shadow. From childhood, women are told to be agreeable, men are told to be strong, and both are told to hide their doubts. But intimacy does not allow such hiding for long. It draws the unconscious into the open. After closeness, when the silence feels sharp, the mask begins to crack. This is not failure. It is life itself, pressing us toward truth. The question becomes, what will you do when the mask slips? Will you scramble to hold it tighter, sending messages that feel false even as you write them? Or will you pause long enough to notice what the shadow is saying? The shadow does not need to be shamed. It needs to be acknowledged. It needs a place at the table of the self. Imagine holding a mirror after intimacy. In that mirror, you see both faces, the mask smiling politely and the shadow trembling behind it. Most turn away from such a mirror, but Jung advised otherwise. He believed the mirror of relationship was sacred because it forced us to see what we could not see alone. To embrace the shadow is not to indulge every fear, but to name it honestly. Yes, I am afraid. Yes, I long for closeness. Yes, I fear being invisible. Once named, the fear loses its secret power. The persona, however, will protest. It will say, if you admit this, you will lose him. If you show this, you will be rejected. But the deeper truth is that only authenticity sustains connection. A mask may win temporary comfort, but it cannot hold intimacy. Only a centered self, one that accepts both light and shadow, can create a bond that endures. Jung often spoke of the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine energies we each carry. A man projects his anima onto a woman, seeking the qualities he has been taught to suppress in himself: tenderness, intuition, emotional depth. When she stands in her wholeness, integrating both her persona and her shadow, she reflects those hidden qualities back to him. He feels, perhaps for the first time, the stirrings of his own soul. This is why her authenticity matters. Without it, he encounters only a mask. With it, he encounters himself. But the road to such authenticity is not easy. It requires patience in the face of silence, compassion in the presence of fear, and the willingness to let go of control. To face the shadow is to sit with discomfort rather than covering it with demands. It is to admit the truth of one's own vulnerability, and in that admission, to find unexpected strength. Think of it as a dance between two figures. The persona is dressed elegantly rehearsed in every move. The shadow is barefoot, raw, and unpracticed. To exclude one is to stumble. To let both move together is to discover a rhythm that feels real. Relationships thrive not on perfect steps, but on honest presence. This is the invitation the shadow offers. Instead of destroying connection, it deepens it if it is faced with courage. The man may feel unsettled when her fear rises, but he feels alive when she acknowledges it without shame. He does not need her to be flawless. He needs her to be real. And she, in turn, needs to realize that wholeness does not mean perfection. It means integration. So the mask and the shadow stand as two doors. The door of the persona leads to temporary relief, but long-term emptiness. The door of the shadow leads to discomfort, but eventual strength. Each woman, each man, must decide which door to walk through after intimacy. Jung would insist that the second door, though harder, is the path toward individuation. To face the shadow is to reclaim power. It is to stop living in fragments and begin to live in wholeness. It is to say, I no longer hide behind a mask, nor do I collapse into fear. I hold both, and I remain myself. In this state, silence after intimacy no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like space to breathe, to grow, to return to one's own center. This is why the interplay between shadow and persona is so critical. It determines whether a relationship becomes a theater of masks or a meeting of souls. It determines whether intimacy leaves us emptier or more whole. And it shows us that the greatest battle is not with the other person, but within ourselves. When we dare to see both mask and shadow clearly, we step onto the path of authenticity. And authenticity, once embodied, is unforgettable. It is this authenticity, not perfection, not control, not performance, that becomes the foundation for true connection. Awakening often begins in silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence, a quiet return inward after the mask has cracked and the shadow has been glimpsed. This silence is not withdrawal, nor is it punishment. It is a conscious pause, a turning of attention from the other back to the self. In that pause, something profound begins to stir. Jung described individuation as the lifelong path toward wholeness. It is the process of bringing what is unconscious into the light of awareness so that the soul can live more truthfully. After intimacy, this path reveals itself in the smallest choices. Will you run into panic, filling the empty space with demands, or will you breathe deeply, acknowledge the fear, and stay anchored in your own essence? That choice marks the difference between repeating old patterns and stepping into awakening. When she chooses to return to herself, she becomes a mirror, but a different kind of mirror than before. No longer reflecting anxiety or lack, she now reflects calm dignity and an inner fullness. The other feels this shift without needing it explained. Instead of sensing pressure, he senses presence. Instead of emptiness, he encounters a wholeness that resonates with something long asleep in his own soul. This is why Jung taught that true attraction is not rooted in performance, but in authenticity. A person who is whole in solitude becomes magnetic because most people cannot find that state within themselves. When she remains steady after closeness, she is no longer projecting need. She is embodying completeness. Her silence carries a kind of music that words could never compose. The awakening is not loud. It arrives like the soft light before dawn. In the stillness, she begins to realize that her worth does not depend on another's quick reply or constant reassurance. Her worth is not diminished by absence, nor is it inflated by attention. It simply is. To rest in that truth is to awaken to her own sacred power. Jung often spoke of symbols as bridges between the conscious and unconscious. In this moment, the symbol is her own centered presence. She becomes, without even trying, a mirror in which the other confronts what he cannot yet face within himself. Her self-possession awakens his anima, the inner feminine he has been taught to suppress. He feels in her calm presence a connection to emotions and intuitions he has long denied. Notice how different this is from control. Control seeks to manipulate outcomes. Awakening accepts the mystery of the process. Control demands answers now. Awakening trusts that time and silence have their own wisdom. In the space created by her return to self, something extraordinary unfolds. He may feel a longing he cannot name, a nostalgia for a home he has never known. That longing is not for her body alone, but for the peace her presence awakens within him. This is why Jung said that deep relationships are opportunities for healing. When she refuses to abandon herself, she creates the conditions for both souls to grow. She models a way of being that says, I am whole, and in my wholeness, I invite you to discover your own. This is not manipulation. It is transformation through example. The awakening also reveals a deeper paradox. Her absence becomes more present than any frantic closeness could. By choosing stillness over chasing, she allows the other to feel his own shadow, the fear of loss, the discomfort of silence, the stirring of emotions he has buried. Her wholeness acts as a mirror, and in that mirror he sees himself more clearly. This is why such a connection becomes unforgettable. It is not just about what she gave him. It is about what she awakened in him. But the greatest gift of awakening is not his return. It is her own transformation. She begins to see that she can hold fear without being consumed by it. She can feel longing without collapsing into desperation. She can embrace solitude without calling it loneliness. This inner shift marks the beginning of true individuation. She is no longer defined by the persona or ruled by the shadow. She is learning to stand in the deeper self, the self that Jung described as the totality of the psyche. The image is of a tree after a storm. Its branches may tremble, but its roots hold firm. The storm is the silence, the uncertainty, the not knowing. The awakening is the discovery that her roots are deeper than she realized. She can withstand the winds without breaking. She can wait without losing herself. And in that realization, her soul grows strong. This strength is not hard or cold. It is gentle, steady, and full of presence. It does not push others away, nor does it cling to them. It simply rests in itself, like a calm lake that reflects everything around it, without distortion. Jung believed that when we embody this kind of presence, we offer others the chance to face themselves. Our stillness becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, the other begins to awaken too. Awakening, then, is not a single event, but a posture of being. It is the choice moment by moment to return to yourself rather than abandon yourself. It is the decision to honor your feelings without letting them dictate desperate action. It is the quiet confidence that says, I am whole, even here, even now. This is the turning point in the journey. The mask and the shadow are still present, but they no longer rule unchecked. She has glimpsed a deeper center, and from that center flows a new kind of magnetism. It is not the magnetism of seduction or control, but the magnetism of authenticity. And that Jung would say is the foundation of true love. Love that heals rather than drains, love that expands rather than confines. So, the awakening after intimacy is simple yet profound. It is the act of turning inward with respect, of honoring the silence as sacred, of discovering that your soul already carries the wholeness you once sought outside. And from this discovery, a new chapter begins, one where connection is no longer built on fear, but on truth. Awakening reveals a truth, but transformation requires a choice. It is not enough to glimpse the stillness within. One must decide to live from it. After intimacy, when silence arrives like a test, the choice becomes clear. Will you abandon yourself in pursuit of another, or will you stand firm in your own center? Jung would say that individuation is marked by these small but decisive acts. The moments when the soul declares, I belong fully to myself. The choice of self-possession may appear simple, but it is revolutionary. For generations, many have been conditioned to equate love with self-erasure, to prove worth through sacrifice, to hold on through constant effort. Choosing instead to remain whole is an act of quiet rebellion. It refuses the old script that says you must chase to be loved. Instead, it writes a new one. Love flows naturally from authenticity, not desperation. This boundary is not a wall. It is not coldness, nor is it punishment. It is a living standard. It says without words, I will not abandon myself even for closeness. Such a boundary protects the soul from dissolving into dependency. And it also protects the bond itself, for no relationship can survive long when built upon demands and exhaustion. By choosing wholeness, you create the conditions for love to breathe. Jung reminded us that what is not faced inwardly is lived outwardly. Without boundaries, old wounds repeat. One becomes trapped in cycles of giving too much, chasing too hard, and collapsing into resentment. The unconscious keeps replaying the same story until it is interrupted by a conscious act. Setting a boundary is that interruption. It is the moment when the unconscious no longer dictates the script. Consciousness takes the pen. This is not a choice made once. It is a posture to be lived again and again. Each time silence comes, the old temptation to chase will arise. The shadow will whisper, if you do not reach for him, he will forget you. The persona will urge, smile, send a message, pretend you are fine. But the deeper self will know real connection cannot be secured through masks. It can only grow in truth. Choosing self-possession each time strengthens the soul until it becomes second nature. The consequences of this choice are profound. When you remain whole, you invite the other to face himself. He feels the difference between being pursued and being mirrored. Chasing provokes resistance. Centered presence evokes longing. In the absence of pressure, he meets his own shadow, the fear of losing, the discomfort of silence, and the ache of vulnerability. Your boundary becomes the mirror in which he sees himself. Jung would call this the healing function of relationship, but even more profound is what happens within. Each time you refuse to abandon yourself, you reclaim a piece of your own authority. You realize that love cannot be begged for. Respect cannot be demanded through desperation. Worth is not proven by effort. It is lived through presence. This realization shifts the entire field of your being. You no longer enter relationships from emptiness, but from wholeness. And that changes everything. Think of the boundary as a lighthouse. It does not chase ships across the sea. It stands firmly on the shore, shining steadily. Those who are meant to return will see its light and be guided home. Those who are not ready will drift elsewhere. But the lighthouse does not diminish for lack of visitors. Its strength is in its constancy. So too, with the soul that refuses to abandon itself. This boundary is not about control. It does not guarantee that someone will return. It does not manipulate outcomes. It simply creates clarity. It allows truth to reveal itself over time. If he returns, it is because he chooses to drawn by authenticity. If he does not, it reveals that he was never prepared to meet you in truth. Either way, you remain whole. Such a choice requires courage, for it means facing emptiness directly. Jung said that the void is where consciousness grows. To remain silent, to sit with longing without filling it with noise, is to allow the seed of selfhood to take root. At first, the silence may feel unbearable, but gradually it becomes fertile ground. The soul learns that what feels like emptiness is actually spaciousness, room for growth, room for clarity, room for deeper love to emerge. Boundaries also teach others how to relate to you. When you hold steady, you send a message far more powerful than words. My soul is not available for games, for half presence, for conditional love. This message may unsettle those who are unready, but it draws near those who are aligned. It filters connection by truth. Jung believed that individuation was never a selfish act. It always served the collective, because an individuated person naturally raises the quality of every relationship they enter. The transformation is not only personal, it is archetypal. The woman who refuses to abandon herself embodies the archetype of the sovereign one who reigns not over others, but over her own life. Her dignity becomes a silent crown. Her presence becomes a throne. She does not chase subjects. She calls forth equals. This archetypal strength stirs something deep in the collective unconscious. Men and women alike feel it, even if they cannot explain why. This is why boundaries, though invisible, reshape destiny. They break the inherited cycle of desperation. They open the path toward authentic love. They transform intimacy from a stage for reenacting old wounds into a temple for discovering truth. To choose wholeness is to honor the sacredness of relationship itself. And so the revolutionary choice after intimacy is not to chase, not to demand, not to dissolve. It is to stand firm in dignity, to care for your body with tenderness, to tend your soul with reverence. It is to make silence a companion rather than a tormentor. It is to discover that every longing, when embraced with compassion, becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. This choice may feel small in the moment, but it is the hinge upon which transformation turns. It marks the passage from living unconsciously to living consciously, from shadow-driven reactions to soul-led responses. Each time it is made, individuation deepens. Each time the self grows stronger. Each time love becomes less about possession and more about truth. So the choice is offered again and again. Abandon yourself or return to yourself. Chase outward or rest inward. Live from fear or embody dignity. Each decision shapes the arc of your life. Jung would remind us that wholeness is not given by another. It is chosen, protected, and lived moment by moment. In this way, boundaries are not barriers to love. They are its foundation. For love without self-possession collapses under weight. Love built on wholeness becomes a sanctuary where two souls meet freely, without masks and without fear. And it all begins with the quiet, revolutionary choice to remain yourself. When the journey of intimacy is seen through the lens of individuation, the final lesson becomes clear. The true power has never been in chasing, demanding, or clinging. It has always been in remembering yourself. To awaken after closeness and choose dignity over desperation is not a trick to draw another back. It is the beginning of a deeper life, one where love no longer empties you, but expands you. Jung taught that every relationship is a mirror. In that mirror, you see both light and shadow. You see your longing, your fear of abandonment, your old wounds rising from the unconscious. And you also see your strength, your capacity to remain whole even in silence. The mirror does not lie. It reflects exactly what is present, whether hidden or revealed. And when you accept its reflection with compassion, you grow. The shadow will always appear. It is not a flaw to feel fear when silence follows closeness. It is human. But the difference lies in whether you allow the shadow to control you or whether you invite it into the circle of awareness. To integrate what you fear is to discover freedom. For when you no longer run from yourself, you are no longer enslaved by another's response. Boundaries, then, are not punishments. They are acts of love. Love for yourself and love for the truth. They are what prevent intimacy from becoming dependency. They are what turn longing into growth instead of despair. When you hold a boundary with quiet dignity, you allow the other person to confront their own shadow, and you allow yourself to remain whole. Sometimes the other will return, drawn by the wholeness they could not find elsewhere. Sometimes they will not, because they are not yet ready to face themselves. Both outcomes carry wisdom. If they return, it is because the truth of your presence left an imprint that could not be forgotten. If they do not, it is because their journey requires distance. Either way, you are not diminished. Your worth has never depended on another's choice. The greatest gift of this process is not whether someone comes back. It is who you become while waiting in silence. You become a woman or a man who knows that dignity cannot be taken away. You become someone who can face emptiness without breaking, someone who can honor vulnerability without shame, someone who can hold love without losing themselves. This is individuation lived in daily life, not a distant idea, but a quiet practice of returning to yourself again and again. Think of the image of a mirror once more. At first, you feared what it showed: neediness, insecurity, longing. But as you learned to stay, you began to see more. You saw compassion, patience, and resilience. You saw the seed of strength sprouting in the soil of solitude. You saw yourself clearly, perhaps for the first time. And that vision cannot be taken away, even if the relationship changes. Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This is the heart of the lesson. After intimacy, you are invited into that privilege. The invitation is not to cling outward, but to awaken inward. It is not to beg for love, but to embody it. It is not to fear solitude, but to discover that solitude itself can be sacred ground. And when you live from this truth, something changes in the way others experience you. Your presence feels different. It carries depth, calm, and authenticity. Those who meet you sense that they are standing in the company of someone who cannot be manipulated because you no longer abandon yourself. They sense, even without words, that they are standing before wholeness. That experience is unforgettable. So let this be the closing reflection. Intimacy is not measured by how quickly someone returns, but by how deeply you remain with yourself. Love is not proven by frantic words, but by silent dignity. The true alchemy of relationship is not possession, but transformation. Two souls awakening each other to what lies hidden within. If you hold this posture, you will never truly lose. Even in absence, you will gain the most precious gift, yourself. And from that center, love will either return renewed or make way for something truer to arrive. Either way, you will remain whole. Take a breath now and reflect. How many times have you given away your center just to keep someone near? And how would your life look if you never had to beg for love again? This is the path Jung invites us to walk, not the path of control, but the path of truth. May you remember that the silence after intimacy is not emptiness. It is a mirror. It is an altar. It is the soil where wholeness takes root. And from that wholeness flows the only love worth having. A love grounded in freedom, dignity, and the courage to be fully yourself. Before we end, I invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from and what part of this reflection spoke to you most deeply. Your words may resonate with another soul searching for the same truth. And if this journey has touched you, take it with you into your daily life, not as a theory, but as a living practice of wholeness.